Inside Iraq, as each rebel village and town fell, there were terrible reprisals. Some estimates put the dead in the tens of thousands. The Iraqi regime likes to film itself at work. These pictures show Shia prisoners and senior officers from the regime. The tape reached the West 2 years later.
The Americans did not interfere. Therefore, it took us only a few days to recover from the surprise, to reorganize our troops, reorganize our resources, and impose peace and order in the southern governors. It took us 2 weeks to do that.
Just a few miles away, 500,000 coalition troops began to leave Iraq. After months in the desert, they were returning home. The Allies still hoped one of Saddam's generals would overthrow him. But the ill-fated uprising had caused the military to rally round Saddam out of fear of something worse. The White House had miscalculated. Meanwhile, the Iraqi leader had a bargain to keep.
We didn't hear any bombing at night, and that was very strange. And you start to hope. You start to think, gosh, the war's over. You can't help it. Somebody came in and just said, get your things together, you're going. And you look around and say, what things? I have no things. And he said, go out. And you wonder if it's a trick, and you kind of put your head round the side of the cell in case somebody's waiting outside there with a cricket bat or something. And there was a line of people standing outside in yellow uniforms. And I joined the end of the line. There were hundreds of reporters, hundreds and hundreds. And that's really quite overwhelming. I mean, you've just been in solitary. And I think that's really when you thought, well, I probably am released. Whenever anybody gets back from war, trying to convince anybody what the realities of war are like is very difficult. Not just my situation. If you've been shot at or in combat and seen friends die, you see it in the films, but you don't smell it, you don't hear it, and you don't see grown men cry, and you don't see what it's like to see real people hurt. And you can never put it in words when you return either.
Now there was a second uprising, in the north where the Kurds lived. Saddam had used chemical weapons to suppress previous revolts there, but the Kurds sensed weakness. The secret police headquarters in Sulaymaniyah was one of the regime's nerve centers. For years, Kurdish guerrillas had fought for independence. Now they united with mutinous troops and attacked. The men inside resisted desperately. They knew there was much to avenge. As night fell, the gates were stormed. A Kurdish teenager educated in Britain was there. He and his friends had listened to President Bush on the radio.
When George Bush said that he would back up a people's revolution in Iraq, then they thought, that's all we need. That's all we wanted to hear, so they just did it.
In the morning, the local people flocked to the burning building. Many were hoping to learn what had happened to family and friends who'd been imprisoned there. Some of Mustafa Aziz's school friends were among the missing.
We were really scared because of this, death camp which had been known that anyone who'd enter would never walk out again. We walked in towards this one room and we saw these hooks, like you get in a butcher's shop where they hang the meat on them. And on one of the hooks we saw a body. And, you know, we saw that the Iraqis would hook people on there. I thought, how could they do this to people? There was bodies everywhere. Iraqi security officers all dead on the floor. It was raining as well at the time, and all the puddles would be just blood. I remember just swearing at the Iraqis, and I remember going up to a couple of bodies and kicking them and spitting on them.
Kurdish opposition leaders who'd been living abroad began to return. Sulaymaniyah was the heartland of the party run by Jalal Talabani. The Kurdish politicians wanted to trigger a coup against Saddam. They hoped a new Iraqi leader would let the Kurds run their own affairs. Traveling with Talabani was an American, an observer from the United States Senate. He believes that day was a turning point.
At that point, everything hung in the balance. Had the United States signaled its support for the uprising, I am convinced it would have succeeded. There were Iraqi generals who were, in fact, in touch with the opposition and who were sitting on the fence waiting to see what would happen. And when the United States did nothing, said nothing, sat on its hands, of course, they took the course of caution.
That very night, Saddam Hussein's troops attacked. Washington had decided it did not want to support an uprising that might lead to the breakup of Iraq. The rebel forces fought back, but they were hopelessly outgunned. The Kurdish leaders who'd encouraged the revolt had made a terrible miscalculation. As shells began landing on the cities, there was panic. Not only were the casualties heavy, but they feared a chemical attack at any moment. Refugees brought terrifying stories about the behavior of the advancing troops.
Anyone over 15, anyone that was capable of carrying a gun, they shoot. They have got no mercy whatsoever. They came with an intention of revenge.
I do not want to push American forces beyond our mandate. And we've done the heavy lifting. Our kids perform with superior courage, and they don't need to be thrust into a war that's been going on for years.
The Iraqi forces advanced relentlessly, and the cities of Kurdistan emptied before them. 1 million people were on the move. They headed for the mountains, trying to reach the safety of the Turkish and Iranian borders.
When George Bush said that he didn't want the American military interfering in this, the Kurds got scared. We heard the shelling and the bombing, and our next door neighbor came around and he said, look, you've heard what people are saying about the Iraqis. I think it'd be, wise of us just to leave Sulaymaniyah. So my dad agreed and said, okay, we'll leave.
It reminded me of refugees leaving Paris in June 1940, just ahead of the German army. Everybody knew of George Bush's call for them to rise up and overthrow Saddam Hussein, and they all had exactly one question: why isn't Bush helping us?
The American air crews patrolling the skies above Iraq could see the Kurds being chased into the mountains, but they had strict orders not to intervene.
Saddam Hussein, bombing, bomba, helicopters, destroyed us. I don't know. They saw this, but they don't know why. We are human like you. You
The only issue that came up is, should we do something about the Iraqi helicopters? It had never been one of our objectives to get involved in this kind of civil uprising between factions within Iraq and the Iraqi government. And so it was not clear what purpose would have been achieved by getting ourselves mixed up in the middle of that.
The Iraqi forces closed inexorably. But the president had promised America the troops were coming home. The British wanted to set up safe havens for the Kurds, but the president refused.
What was self-evident was that unless some action was taken, we may well be seeing the genocide of a nation. We found it intolerable, and for that reason we began to proceed with our plans to do something about it.